Hey, good looking. Welcome back to my channel. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I am going to be going over single shadow palettes that I have duped, and then I ended up buying the actual palettes themselves. So if seeing a couple of swatch comparisons and also taking a look at the put together palettes versus the actual palette sounds like something that you're interested in, please consider staying tuned and subscribing. Hi, I'm Kendra Morgan Official, and I like to put out content weekly centered around single eyeshadows, makeup brushes that aren't Morphe, and sunscreen. So if you like that kind of content, make sure you subscribe to my channel. And let's get started. I have bought, well, okay, let me take that back and specify for you guys. I actually was gifted two of the three palettes that I'm going to be going over, but I actually ended up breaking down and purchasing a palette that I actually duped to try and save myself some money on. So this video is actually kind of a reverse, let's take a look at the other side of things. So I often am found through the YouTube algorithm, and I know that through the YouTube search, I'm found a lot by you guys on the palettes that I dupe. I kind of wanted to take a step back and also talk to you guys about when it's okay to own a palette, or when it's okay to, dupe that palette. When should you do what? And so let's get into it. The first palette that I actually duped, and I had no intentions of ever owning, but I actually duped that palette, and it was the Child palette, the Colourpop Mandalorian palette. I actually duped it, and the only reason that I duped it was just because I really loved the color story on the Child palette. It was in collaboration with one of my good friends on YouTube here, Kara, Beauty and the Frizz, and we put together this palette dupe combination and I found out recently that both of us now own the palette. So in some cases, it does pay off to actually own the palette itself. So here is my actual dupe palette. I actually had to go back in and grab the singles and put them in there. I used the palettes for like a week or so, and then when I get done with the palette story, I go ahead and take all my singles and put them back in their storage components, so then they can be ready for the next dupe shadow. So here is the palette, and here is my dupe palette. Now I knew for a fact I didn't have a lot of the shadows that were in the palette, so I took liberties. For example, right hand Mondo right here in the Colourpop palette, oops, excuse me, right there, I duped it with Makeup Geek's Limelight up here, which looks absolutely nothing like the shadow in the Colourpop palette. But I just wanted to take some liberties on that and have some fun with the palette and add like a little bit of a twist. And it was in collaboration with Beauty and the Frizz, and one of her friends said, I actually got an extra palette, I'd love to gift it to you, so can I send it to you? And I said, absolutely, I think that'd be great. So I ended up getting gifted this palette, but would I have purchased the palette had it not been gifted to me? And the answer is probably, with Colourpop's recent 30% off sale and this being restocked for that sale, I would have to say yes. And I'll tell you why. I'm actually intrigued by these olive shades and this brown shade down here, along with these two kind of, well, it's a Super Shock shadow and right hand Mondo, which I didn't know was a Super Shock shadow, but I guess it is. I don't really understand these things. They don't really have a lot of punch to them. They just have a little like sparkle shimmer, and they're kind of squishy. I don't know. They look quite transparent and loose, and I don't know. I don't really get them, but they look really pretty, I guess. I have some on my lid today from the That's Taupe palette from Colourpop. So yeah, I do like Colourpop's formula, and I also like the olive tones here. The sea green, the mint green, not really my favorite, but I do like that I own the Leafing So Soon by Makeup Geek, and it's more of a satin shimmer, and I really do actually appreciate that. If I had to choose between picking up this palette or this palette, which one would I use? It would probably be my singles, because the two shadows that I really truly am interested in are these two right here, and they're both by Sydney Grace. And I am going to go ahead and put the picture of the swatches and the the shadows up here in the corner. So I'm giving you guys some negative space right there so I can show you that picture and the swatches and just let you guys know what I chose for the palette. In the end, am I really glad to own this palette by Colourpop? Absolutely. But would I go out and buy the palette? Not unless it was on sale. So I guess the answer would probably have to be ultimately no, I would probably not go out and purchase the palette. Let's take a look at another video instance where I duped the palette and then I ended up owning the actual palette that I duped. And in that case, it was the Raw Beauty Kristi, again, Raw Beauty Kristi Colourpop palette, and it was the At Forest Sight palette. This, again, I actually won in a giveaway. So it was kind of one of those things, would I have actually purchased the palette? And the answer is probably yes, I would have, because there is a duochrome, and then also Colourpop doesn't have a palette that has these types of deeper jewel tone shades. I'm going to go ahead and link for you guys the video where I actually compare both palettes. I didn't grab out the singles this time around just because there's 12 of them, and many of the singles were actually Coastal Scents, which is no longer in business. So if you're interested in checking out that video, it's in-depth swatches, tutorials, side-by-side looks, and I'm going to link that in the eye for you guys. Go check that out if you're really truly interested in it. But back to the actual question of whether or not I would own the palette, the answer is yes, I would. I would definitely pick up the palette. But now I keep a journal where I list all the single shadows that I use to dupe the shades in a palette. Would I go back and maybe recreate that palette? The answer is probably yes, because knowing what I know now, these shadows are insanely pigmented, and many of the romantic jewel tones that I like to use for just a nice wash of color on the lids are just like the Amanita and Homegrown shades, and maybe even this Old Growth shade. I find them to be just extremely pigmented and just a little bit more intense than I'm looking for in a soft, like going out to the grocery store and I just want a little, you know, wash of color on the lid. It's just a little too pigmented for me. There's too much saturation. And so I actually can appreciate Coastal Scents' more subdued, buildable formula in that case. And with many of the Coastal Scents shadows being used in this palette's dupe, I would probably end up going with the dupe palette. So in that case, I do like and appreciate the singles a little bit more, knowing what I know now. The last and final palette that I duped, and I did it to talk myself out of owning this palette. I didn't want it, but every time I saw it, it was just amazing, amazing quality. And then, but wait, there's more. My friend, Rupi Minhas, actually got gifted some Flower Beauty products, and she used the palette in a video, and I was done for. That was it. I saw the shimmer, I saw the butteriness, I saw the creaminess. I'm going to link her video up here where she tries out the Flower Beauty products, but that's what basically sold me on that. I just did not have the same formula. So I actually duped the Flower Jungle Lights palette using all 6 Sydney Grace shadows that I have in my collection. Even though I love Sydney Grace's formula, I really truly enjoy duping using her shadows because I almost always feel very secure that the shadow's quality and performance are just going to be outstanding. So if you pick up any of those shades, you will just really be as enthusiastic about using the shades as I am. This time around, however, the palette actually trumps the shades. I'm going to show you guys some footage here, but I actually duped the palette's vibes. And you can see even on like the first shade, I did not get very close at all. I really missed the punchline right there. So you can see that I take and actually go through and find that bronze to perfection really is the type of luster that the Jungle Lights palette formula offers. So the green, olive green shade, so beautiful. I think that actually looks relatively close to Sydney Grace's. However, Sydney Grace's formula was a little bit more cool and blue leaning green instead of the more olive jungle green that I was really after. And you can see here going through, it just wasn't the same formula. You can see the difference in formula. There is a creamy, buttery goodness in that Jungle Lights palette that just cannot be mimicked. It can't be duped. It can't be replicated under any circumstances. And you'll also see that just by looking at a palette and looking at creamy, beautiful swatches from Hannah Louise Poston even, I'm not able to achieve a perfect spot-on dupe. That last shade right there, I couldn't have been farther from the truth. It was actually more of a mauve lavender, and I went more towards a pink shade, and I ended up with using, I think it was Go For It maybe, or something like that. But anyways, I'll have the name written up on the next to the hand what I actually ended up using, so you guys can see that even though the shades, I mean, the shades look similar, they look so gorgeous. I love Sydney Grace's formula, no issues with that whatsoever. It's more of a soft, subtle, pigmented bridal hue, and you know what I'm talking about. But this is a sleek, it's a wet, it is like, yeah. This is my La Croix. This is my La Croix water, and this is my Truly. You know what I mean? You know what I mean when I say that. I know, we'll keep it PG, but you know what I mean. It's a little bit more romantic. It's a little bit more risque, if you will. It's a creamy goodness. You just run your fingers over these shadows and then look at the pigmentation that you get. It's just so unbelievable. I don't know why more people don't talk about this. It's just gorgeous. I mean, like, this is one of those, you take this palette, you pack it with you in your little train case that you've got, you know, like what I've got right here. You put it in there and you just smear the shadow over the lid. And maybe you brought a brush, maybe you didn't, I don't know. And you just buff out just ever so slightly. And if you don't, you just use your fingers and just continue to tap out those shadows until you just kind of tap out a little bit of the shimmer and you've just got a little bit of the pigment left. They're so beautiful. I can't stop talking about it. I am so glad that I picked up this palette. Now, does that mean that I don't love my Sydney Grace shadows? Absolutely not. But in some instances, I will say the palette sometimes trumps the duping. Yeah, so that kind of brings me up to, you know, when is a really good time to purchase the palette over the singles? And when is it really a good idea to use the singles versus the palettes? And I would have to say most of that is going to be based off of formula and probably your packaging. So I don't like to put money into packaging at all. If you notice, I use mostly singles. I destroyed a Pat McGrath Celestial Divinity palette pretty much. Kind of reused it, recycled it, so to speak. Didn't have any problems, you know, taking the palette apart and then making it, you can see it's really scarred up on these these edges right here. And taking these palettes or these shadows out and making them removable shadows, because I just don't really care about packaging that much. I just needed something to hold these shadows in, right? And then now I can take and remove these shadows and use them on an individual basis. And that's kind of what I look for. So packaging is gonna be probably farther up there. So like when you think about packaging, I think about Pat McGrath, I think about Dior, and I also think about something like, what's another really expensive one? Maybe Natasha Denona. She's got some really heavy, luxurious packaging as well. So if that's something that you're truly after, by all means, you're probably going to spend some money on that. Now, where I really found the key to knowing that I was going to purchase this palette was the formula. Over and over and over, the people who reviewed this palette consistently said there is a beautiful, creamy, buttery formula. It's a wet formula. And over they reiterated to me that the formula was very specific and very unique, even for a drugstore brand. And that's when I knew that probably the Sydney Grace's formula would be different enough that these shadows, even though the hues were similar, and even though I didn't mimic them the first time around, I did find shadows eventually that actually duped the colors, the formula was going to be just tremendously different. So that's how I knew that in this instance, that the palette would actually be worth owning at that point. I hope this video helped you guys out. And if you found value in this content, make sure you subscribe to my channel, guys. I can't wait to see you in my next video. Bye.